Hello and good evening. My name is David Hutchinson. I'm the Assistant Director for Capital and Asset Management with the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to talk about the 2023 capital budget. There's some really exciting people on the line with us tonight to talk about some really fun projects. I'm excited to have this group together. So just for some kind of level setting, tonight we're going to go through the capital budget itself, what's in the capital budget, what's in the operating budget, talk through the process for building the capital budget for next year. Then we're going to get to hear from City Parks, who has some really great Parks and Rec programs, and they program a lot of our major capital assets in the park space. We're also going to get to hear from the Department of Public Works. There's some really talented people on the call from that team as well tonight. We're going to have an opportunity for you to ask any questions you may have. You can also enter those in the Q&A text at any point if you'd like. We can answer them that way too. And then we're going to close out with some further opportunities for engagement. Hopefully you leave here with a bunch of tools you can share with your friends and your neighbors to help provide more ideas for the capital budget for next year. So first, we want to start by telling you what's actually in the capital budget. There's kind of three cardinal rules for capital budget projects. First off, we want to make sure that we're doing work on a city-owned asset, whether that's purchasing something or upgrading or restoring something. It needs to be something that the city owns. We're going to talk about some of the complications there in a little bit too. Second, we want to make sure that the value of the asset's at least $50,000. There's some assets that we do purchase with the operating budget funds, but for capital, we try to stick to the higher ticket items. And then third, we want to make sure that what we're paying for is going to be lasting for a few years. So we're looking for items and projects with a useful life of at least 5 years. In practical terms, there's a lot of expenses the city has, and they're usually divided between our two budgets, operating and capital. So on the operating side is a lot of our day-to-day expenses, a lot of things associated with employees, whether that be salaries or benefits, retirement benefits as well. Uniforms and day-to-day supplies are included in the operating budget too. We also pay for our utilities. So while Andrea and Chris work on putting lights up in the ball fields, once those lights are up and installed, the actual utilities get paid for out of the operating budget. The capital budget is more so about the built environment. It's about pools and playgrounds and ball fields, streets and bridges, a lot of the physical things in your neighborhood. We also pay for vehicles out of the capital budget, and some of our major HUD funding comes through the capital budget as well. Some real world examples. We're well into summer now, so we're going to be opening the pools in just a little bit. For the operating budget, that's where all of the salaries and the uniforms for the lifeguards come out of. On the capital side, and if you recognize, this is the Mushroom from Bloomfield pool, which is a pretty popular pool. All of the big infrastructure, if we were to upgrade pools like we did with Shenley a few years ago, those expenses come out of the capital budget. For our parks programs, the rangers, their salaries come out of public safety and the operating budget. The actual park infrastructure, like if we were to upgrade Blue Slide Park, that would come out of the capital budget. When Max Dennison and City Parks is running the amazing Rec to Tech programs like this one in Paulson, that would come out of the operating budget. So the computer supplies, Max's salary, those kind of things come out of operating, but the actual building itself, if we were to do a major renovation on Paulson Rec Center, that comes out of capital. So to keep everybody on your toes, we're going to have some polls throughout the night. This is going to be our first one. So the first poll question is, how many parks are operated by City Parks, the City of Pittsburgh Department of Parks and Recreation? And there's 4 options. Option A is 5, option B is 25, option C is 93, and option D is 163. So you should have an opportunity to answer in the poll. So a lot of things to consider. There's quite a few parks in different neighborhoods. Some are bigger, some are smaller. But if you think about 90 neighborhoods, roughly how many parks do you think are in each neighborhood? You can kind of take a guess that way. So Alex, if you don't mind sharing the results, let's see where everybody landed. Okay, it looks like 18% of people guessed B, 25 parks. 36% of people guessed C, 93 parks. That's a pretty solid guess, but 45% of you got it right. It's actually 63 parks across the city of Pittsburgh. And they're divided up into kind of 3 categories. So city planning helped do some work for the open space plan that we talked about in last night's meeting to kind of define those 3 types of parks. You may be familiar with the bigger regional parks. Those are like Shenley and Highland Park. You may have a community park in your neighborhood or have been to the downtown parks like Market Square or Mellon Park in Shadyside. Also, a lot of us just have neighborhood parks. I've got one across the street that I'm lucky to have access to. So there's 148 of those neighborhood parks spread out around the city as well. It's also important to consider that we're not the only game in town. There's a lot of really great assets throughout the city that you may consider to be crucial to the identity of your neighborhood or something that you utilize all the time. They may not be city owned. So maybe you've been to a sporting event at Cupper Stadium on the south side. That's actually owned by Pittsburgh Public Schools. I think we've all been to Point State Park or taken family there or taken out of towners there. That's a great asset that's actually owned and maintained by the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And then on the North Shore, we have that great park for cooling off on the Riverfront Park. That's actually owned by the Sports and Exhibition Authority of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. So the group that owns the stadiums, they actually own that park as well. When it comes to capital planning, a lot of the projects, especially the ones that the Department of Public Works works on, can be complicated projects with multiple phases. They can take multiple years and many millions of dollars. So to do a project like Southside Park, where you're doing a major renovation, you're going to need a few different phases of funding. So when we get proposals from people like our great landscape architect, Andrea Ketzel, they come with multiple year asks. The idea with that is we want to be funding project phases just in time so that the money is not sitting around unused until the very end when we have those big construction bills. We want to be constantly feeding the project just enough money to complete the next crucial phase and set the table for a bigger allocation in later years when we actually need the construction funds. So this is an excerpt from an actual proposal that was submitted to us as part of last year's budget. There's 2.7 million requested for 2022, and then 2 additional phases for 2023 and 2024. When it comes to the capital budget itself, though, what we're legislating is just 1 year. So for 2022, we only were legislating the actual 2022 budget. But as part of best practice, we still hold on to and build out outer year budgets in what's called a capital improvement plan. So even though they may not be easy to see, there are those outer year phases from Andrea's proposal for 2023 and 2024 contained within the capital budget, capital improvement plan for those same years. So we want to make sure that we have enough funds for construction when it gets time to build. The capital budget itself, if you think about it, is really just stacking a bunch of those projects in the outer years on top of each other. So that allows us to be responsible when it comes to planning what our debt strategy is going to be with taking out bond funds or knowing how much pay-go or pay-as-you-go funds we'll need to transfer from the operating budget in future years. Speaking of money, this is quiz number 2. Alex, if you don't mind to put it up for us. The question is, how much does it cost to rent a park pavilion in the city of Pittsburgh? So I don't know if you've ever been to an event in the city. Maybe you've had a barbecue or a family reunion, something like that. There's 4 options. Option A is $162. Option B is $375. Option C, $540. And option D is $722. I will note you can do liquor licenses with some of them as well. I was looking up park pavilions earlier this week. I do want to applaud the city in the last, I don't know when we started, maybe 5 or 6 years. We've been kind of moving at warp speed, getting into the 21st century with online booking when it comes to the park pavilions. It used to be a really interesting in-person process, and I'm glad we've gone digital with that one. So Alex, I don't know if you want to show the results. So everybody got this right. Option A, $162, 46% of you said that. 54% of you chose option B, $375. The correct answer is they're both right. We actually have a few different sized facilities with different amenities. So if you want to rent McKinley, you can pay $162 for that. Or if you want to use my favorite one, the West End Overlook, it'll set you back $375. But I promise you the views, West End Overlook, you won't regret it. Still one of the most underrated views in the city, in my opinion. In terms of the capital budget process, we're actually kind of smack dab in the beginning of it for a really crucial piece. So in April, the mayor provides priorities to the departments for next year's capital budget. They're designed to inspire department directors to select projects that are going to align with those priorities. We're going to talk about them in just a little bit, and then you'll have an opportunity to actually give us feedback on those priorities as well if you complete the survey. In May, our office, the Office of Management and Budget, sends out a request for proposals to all city department heads, all council offices, and some other project partners we've worked with in the past, major partners like PWSA or the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. In May and June, we do our best to get as much public input as possible. We do that through a few different ways. This year, we've started going out to community development meetings, community development corporation, or just community meetings. Neighborhood groups have been nice enough to host us so that we can go out and explain how both budgets work and ask people for their input. It's been a really fun process. We also host a survey on our Engage page, which we'll explore later in the meeting. And we have these 3 public meetings. So they're great opportunities, but we'll have other opportunities later in the year that we'll talk about. In July is actually, we have the deadline for the proposals. We want to see all the department directors and the city council offices send in their proposals on July 1st. Through the months of July and August, our office, along with the city council budget office and the controller's office, which makes up the capital program facilitation committee, meets with the departments and we ask them questions. So even though we're getting written proposals with some great detail, we still may have some lingering follow-up questions about timeline, things that we want to understand how the project's going to impact, the operating budget further. We can ask those questions in those meetings. During that whole process, that same capital program facilitation committee is scoring all of the proposals as well. So once the proposals are scored in September, that committee submits a summary report of how each project scored to the mayor's office as a formal recommendation for what to include in next year's budget. In September, the mayor utilizes that report to submit a preliminary budget. There's a really good opportunity between that September budget and the mayor's kind of final November budget for the public to provide input. There's a great budget simulator we'll talk about later in the meeting where you can provide your input on that draft budget. But then again, in November, usually the second Tuesday, the mayor does a state of the city address in which the mayor can lay out the formal budget for council to then deal with. So council has the opportunity throughout December to also meet with the departments and ask them questions as part of televised hearings. If you've never watched council before, it's a great chance to kind of dip your toe in and see how those meetings go. They can get really in the weeds in some fun ways, asking policy questions. I recommend watching them again. Those are going to be in December. And then council can submit and vote on their own proposals to amend the budget that the mayor submitted. Once all of the amendments pass, the council does a final vote on the amended version of the budget. And then that will align with our fiscal year, which is the calendar year start of January 1st. In terms of priorities for the 2023 budget, I think Mayor Gainey's done a really good job of grouping them into kind of larger values and concepts that express the values of this administration. So within safe neighborhoods, welcoming communities, and thriving people, Mayor Gainey is actually drilling down with even more specific values that allows the department directors and even the council offices to understand where we want to see capital budget proposals for next year. Again, we'll talk about those a little bit more with the survey, and you'll have a chance to give feedback on that. But we also want to give you just kind of a preview of what the proposal process looks like. So this is an actual proposal form for 2023. On the first page, we ask for some summary data in terms of the financial ask. So we will ask people like, project managers, Andrea Ketzel, to tell us for 2023, what phase are you going to be in for this project? How much money do you want? And then what kind of flavor of money is appropriate? Bond is a form of debt. Our community development block grants play a crucial role in some of our capital projects, and our pay-as-you-go transfers from the operating budget also have a part in capital projects. So departments can ask for specific funding if it makes sense for that style of project. Also, we want to understand a little bit more about the context of the project through 3 questions. First, we ask for just kind of a plain language description of the project. We want to understand what work is going to be done if it's funded. Second, we want to ask for a project justification, specifically, what's the impact if we don't do this project? And then third, we want to understand what the operating budget impact is going to be. This is part of a conversation that's continual throughout the summer between our team on the capital side and the operating budget team to make sure that we're aligning everything correctly. Sometimes, let's say on the operating side, they want to hire 10 new laborers. On the capital side, that may mean that we need 5 new trucks. So those kind of conversations are important, but we like to know ahead of time what the operating budget impact is going to be through the capital budget proposal as well. In terms of scoring, we actually have a process that's outlined in Chapter 218 of City Code in terms of how the projects are scored. This was our set of scoring criteria from last year. So we actually asked on the proposal form for each respondent to speak directly to each of the scoring criteria. So we have kind of an apples to apples response to everything we need to score on. For 2022, I'm sorry, in this year for 2022, for 2023, we actually updated the scoring criteria earlier this year through an ordinance. We did a few things. One, we cleaned up some of the language just to make it more consistent in terms of how the wording goes, but we also made two major policy changes. The first is we added this first section in yellow, which reads, project has a clear plan for execution, including site control, project timeline, procurement strategy, and professional cost estimate. We found in the capital side that when those ducks are in a row, it makes for a much more successful project. So we have really talented people, but they're also really busy. We want to move beyond just kind of back of the envelope calculations and get into a real project plan at this stage in the game so that we know we're funding a project that's ready to hit the ground running as soon as it gets the money. Third, we updated an existing scoring criteria that used to read ability to improve quality of life in all city neighborhoods to the new text, project improves quality of life for city residents with low and moderate incomes. This is a really important expression of our values. We do get community development block grant funds, but it's not enough. We need to give the residents in our neighborhoods with lower and moderate incomes a better leg up, more opportunities in the city. So to do that, our part of that is making sure that those projects that are in neighborhoods with higher concentrations of lower incomes get higher priority when it comes to scoring for capital budgets. We're gonna hit our third quiz before we pass to city parks in a little bit. So this third question, DPW is in charge of 346 courts and fields. Which sport has the most playing surfaces? So the four options are A, hockey, B, basketball, C, tennis, and D, baseball. I will note that also all four of these sports are currently in season, two of them in their championship phase. So if you're a fan of any of them, there's a chance to learn some more about these sports. They're a lot of fun. We have some really great assets. I think every neighborhood park has kind of its own character, including its own group of people who come to play these kind of sports. You can pick up games of a different flavor all over the city. As a high schooler, I actually used to drive to Mellon Park and Shadyside. There were some good pickup basketball games there. So that was where I used to go to. So question 3, Alex, do you mind to bring up the results?
Hey, Dave, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. City Channel, could we please pin the ASL interpreters? They're not showing up on the screen. Thank you.
Are we all good now, Alex? Okay, Patrick, let me know if they're still unpinned. So 46% of you said B, bass. I'll stop sharing my screen so you can show yours. Sorry about that. Yeah, one of the cool things about having both of these groups on the call is that DPW, oftentimes Department of Public Works, is very close in concert with city parks when it comes to adapting some of their strategies around food programs and also recreation assets. They've done some amazing work together, so it's always nice to kind of see them present together as well. With that, I'll pass it to Catherine, if you're ready.
Thank you, David. You did such a good job kind of introing the work of city parks and our relationship to the capital budget specifically. So, you know, as David mentioned, my name is Catherine Vargas. I'm the director of the Department of Parks and Recreation, also known as City Parks. I also have Luann Haran on the line too. She is the assistant director of our Healthy Active Living senior programs. And so Luann will be online to be able to answer any questions regarding that after the presentation. So first, welcome to City Parks. You know, when you think about City Parks, we're really talking about the people and the programs that happen across our parks and the 50 facilities that the city has active programming in. We are one of the unique things about us is that we don't actually have a capital budget that we operate, but in order to do the work that we do, we have to partner really closely with Department of Public Works on our capital projects because we rely on making sure that our facilities, the facilities that we jointly work in the facilities that are partners. We also work with youth sports groups and that they have the facilities that they need. So when we're talking about capital budget priorities, we work really closely with DPW because we want to make sure that those capital improvements are also having a direct impact on the work that we're able to do on behalf of the city. So it is a really great partnership. And with that, our mission really is to provide that programming. We have year-round about 100 people that work on our team. Again, we are working out of about 50 facilities across the city, and we also do programming within the parks. We are, anything from what you see here, programs about health and wellness, to arts and enrichment, to the rec to tech work that Dave Hutchinson alluded to earlier. We are really working to build a fabric of engagement so that when people, city residents, or even visitors come to our parks or come to our facilities, there is that active engagement and the team there to support that. And as I mentioned, we have about 100 folks who are on our team year round, but we are highly seasonal as well. Dave Hutchinson mentioned it's summertime, and that is our busy season. And we look to grow the department if possible, 300 to maybe 400 people. Since COVID hit, seasonal employment has been a challenge and continues to be one for us. But we do a lot of our heavy lifting in the summertime, and so our team grows significantly in that time as well. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the core areas of our work and how it relates back to the mayor's priorities. First, the work that we do to promote safety and wellness among older adults in the community. A lot of people don't know it, but the city of Pittsburgh is the largest provider of supports for older adults in Allegheny County. We have a partnership with the Allegheny County Area on Aging to run 13 healthy active living centers across the city of Pittsburgh. And this is the largest network of centers of this kind that are there to support older adults as it relates to having nutrition support, having the programs that provide direct services, having the community, which is incredibly important, of people to kind of come together and experience an active and vibrant, community within their neighborhoods. We know that it's super important that as individuals age, that in order to be able to stay safe and happy in your community, that you have these same support systems. And what's really great about the work that we do at our Healthy Active Living Centers is not only that we have our community-based centers that are operating every day to support our older adults, but we also bring everyone together on a regular basis as well. So we're creating this network of really active engagement among those that we serve. Our team is super dedicated to this work. It is a really wonderful experience being able to go in and see just how much the work that people are doing are impacting the lives of the folks that come out and participate, and how dedicated our team is to this work. So, being able to make sure that older adults are safe in their home is critically important to us. The other group of Pittsburgh residents that we have a huge focus on in the work that we do, of course, are youth and families. Our recreation centers serve the entire community. We have access to a gym, we have access to a weight room for anybody of any age. But when we really think about the programs that we run, we are focused on making sure that not only do young people have a safe place to be and caring adults there that are engaging with them, but that we are also thinking about that time and that it is also enriching, and it is something that is helping in making sure that young people have access to opportunities. So a great example, again, would be Rec to Tech. When we think about the types of upgrades that we've been able to do in the more recent years. We had a capital project last year at Ammon Rec Center that renovated the second floor of that center so that we could pilot this year a 15-week course on various technology, coding, computer science. We did 3D printing. We did a lot of fun gaming, game design with young people at Ammon Rec Center because we had the upgrades necessary to be able to provide that. So when we think about what recreation centers provide to the community, we're really trying to make sure that we are keeping up with the times of what recreation really means. And for us, that means, of course, a wonderful, safe place for young people to be and active and learning, but also enriching and thinking about how are we supporting the future of a young person's development. How are we helping with educational outcomes? We are actually on the brink right now. In about a week or so, we'll have 300 young people joining us for City Camp. It's a free summer camp across 6 of our recreation centers. It's a wonderful camp that really blends all of our programming together to make sure the young people are having a safe summer and also a summer that is preventing summer slide, summer learning loss, that we're still engaging in academics. It's really important work, and it's one of the focuses of our programming. And then lastly, another big piece of our programming, of course, is what we offer to all city residents across all of our facilities and out in our parks. So when you think of things like spray park investments or the Shenley Ice Rink, or even the tennis and pickleball and places where things are programmed, we do stay involved in those as well because we work with a lot of partner organizations. We work with youth sports organizations. We have our city sports summer, year-round city sports leagues. In baseball season, we'll be playing over 400 games that we're helping to organize with baseball teams. So all of those assets in our parks are really important to us as well because we are working with those partners. We're helping to program those spaces. And so we really see the facilities sort of out large in our park spaces as places where we can help bring program and activity to. Another popular one out in the parks is the Art Cart, where we bring arts enrichment and activity out to the parks, on a regular basis so that families and young people that are around can also have that really rich engagement. And so when we think about these investments, what we're trying to do is say hey, how can we make sure that not only do we have these wonderful parks, but that we are also part of keeping the programs and activities there vibrant and that they're accessible to all. And I also want to mention that another really important piece of this being welcoming and accessible are ADA improvements that are a critical priority as it relates to our facilities. And anytime we do a major capital project, ADA accessibility is, a number one factor that we pay attention to because it's so critical to make sure that these facilities are ready to welcome anybody who wants to participate. So I want to real quickly, I kind of talked more, these are the lines of work that we do, but I wanted to give a quick snapshot of what that looks like. What kinds of facilities are we talking about? And I know I referenced many of them. A couple that I just want to point out that I hadn't really mentioned are our community enrichment programs. So of course, we have our community recreation, which are those very specifically tied to recreational activity. It helps inspire the opportunity for people to really get active in our facilities. But we also think a lot about community health and wellness. So if you think about our healthy active living centers, we have a summer food program, an after school food program. Our summer foods program is actually also the largest food program in the county. We work with community partners to make sure that anywhere where we can have food access, we are creating it. We have summer foods at our spray parks. We try to think about places where kids are and at our recreation centers and with community partners, around 60 sites across the city. And that list will be getting out there shortly. So we're also working on that food security piece. And then in community enrichment programs, this is everything that has to do with our ability to make sure that young people are having those enriching experiences. One of the things that we do is we work really, really closely with Pittsburgh Public Schools on a number of community enrichment programs. We bring our programming into the schools. We also have partnerships between our rec centers and their local school. A great example is at Concord this year. All of the young people came through Phillips Rec Center for their big field day. Another great example at Phillips on the south side, every day after school, we're walking kids from Phillips Elementary over to the rec center for that engagement. So we have these really deep and great relationships with PBS that are critical in our ability to provide these programs. And we also run a number of community festivals. So not only the programming that is very specific to our centers, but these festivals often occur in our parks and they're open to everybody. And sometimes it's the first engagement someone has with us, and then people come and visit us at our centers after being part of that. And I think Dave did a great job talking about our parks and the acreage. I think it's great to see just how expansive it really is. There's so much opportunity there. So we're always also thinking about creative new ways to do programming. I did also want to really quickly mention that we have regional parks as well. What's important about regional parks is that we receive RAD dollars to program in those parks. So we have another funding source of operation ability to be able to do some really unique and different things in these parks because we have that additional funding support. So you can kind of see here, there are the 5 real kind of larger parks in Pittsburgh. We have that opportunity to program there. So again, when we talk about capital dollars, I just wanted to showcase some of the really exciting capital improvements that DPW has done that impacts our lives directly. I mentioned the Ammon Rec Center. You can see that on the top there under Recreation and Technology. That has really helped us facilitate those programs. You see some pickleball courts. Pickleball is like after COVID, everybody wants to play. And we get a lot of requests on pickleball. So it's an important improvement. You see Moore Park Pool, a brand new pool that's opening this year. And one of our newer renovated Healthy Active Living centers over in Beechwood there. So you can kind of see where these facility improvements, they look great and they help us activate better programming. And please visit us. Visit us this summer, visit us on the web, and follow us on Facebook. We're always giving updates about our programs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, TPW gets their slide deck ready. I'll just say, yeah, pickleball is definitely having a moment. I remember playing in middle school. I grew up playing a little bit of tennis on public courts, and then for gym class, couldn't get that many kids on a court, so you do pickleball. I was like disappointed, and then I started playing. It's a lot of fun. It's very fast. There's a lot of opportunities to do the fun part of tennis, which is hit the ball, and do less of the non-fun part, which is run.
Hey Dave, this is Luann. Can I add a few comments? Under the capital budget, you get community development block grant funds, and part of that goes to the senior program every year, and that's really vital to us that we receive those funds. And every senior center in the city is eligible to receive community development funds. So last year we got $1 million to help support the senior centers, and I'm going to put in that same request this year, and that was an increase from past years where we were getting $750,000. So it's wonderful that the mayor's office increased that for us, which will really help pay salaries because there's always increases in that, and the costs keep going up. So it's wonderful to get that increase. And one thing I wanted to mention, in working with DPW, we've done a lot of work with them lately on some of the senior centers, really important. We're doing some work in combination with them and meeting with some design work on the Brighton Heights Senior Center. We've had a lot of meetings in design work, so we're going to do some work there with capital budget money. It's going to be wonderful. And also at Warrington Rec Center, there's going to be some new programs and new design work going in there, a lot of improvements that are taking place that we work in combination with Public Works and talk about our needs. So they're really helpful. We're really a team effort to get things done. And one of the new projects that are coming up, really important, we've been waiting for this roof 20 years. It's been 20 years in the making. We're going to work on getting a new tennis dome at Mellon Tennis this year. So that's a big one and well needed. And it was really helpful. Public Works working really closely with us to make that happen. So I know the people, the players over at Mellon Tennis are going to be thrilled to have that happen. There's some things I wanted to mention that are really important to us. And we're really pleased to see these new improvements coming out of capital budget. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and congratulations. I think you all have adapted incredibly well, especially throughout the pandemic. Rec centers now have really changed into these kind of Swiss Army knife style buildings that can offer so many different types of programs, literally from very young children all the way up to some of our oldest residents, which is not easy to do. But luckily you've got some great partners in the Department of Public Works. So if you get all that high-speed fiber and new gym floors in those buildings. Chris, are you comfortable sharing your screen?
First, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Also, special thanks to Luann for all her kind words. Parks and Recreation is one of our really great partners here at the city. We really value the work that they bring the community, and so it's pretty easy for us to help out. I want to frame, Public Works in the simplest way possible, and that is, we're responsible for, cleaning stuff and fixing things. So, you would think that the capital budget is just mostly about fixing things and making improvements, but actually, it does intersect in some interesting ways with, some of our cleaning responsibilities. So for those of you out there that have received your recycling bin, that program was funded via the capital budget. And so we're extremely grateful for that. Also, we have a censored litter can program. So a lot of our litter cans that are in the street have a sensor in them that tell us when they're filled. They help us be very efficient with the collection of that litter. It's very beneficial for the division of labor for us in terms of how we service those cans. So the capital budget benefits the city in a variety of ways, and we in Public Works kind of interact with that. I'm going to focus on this presentation just kind of on the process of how we would engage with, I think, Parks and Recreation, because I think it makes it very interesting, but it also will give you a broader sense of how we in Public Works will approach the idea and the concept of the capital budget. So the first question I often get is, how's a project proposal get started? And a lot of times it comes directly from Public Works. So these come internally. They're from direct observation and data gathered by our staff, whether that's field staff or people like project managers such as Andrea Ketzel. And so these tend to be places where we have known maintenance issues or safety concerns. These are things like playground replacements or other facility repairs that we just aren't budgeted in our operating budget to deal with in any way other than to just simply make safe. We also get them as part of our partnerships with Parks and Recreation, but also other city departments such as public safety, through our cross coordination and advocacy from them. And then we're also coordinated with other departments that might be impacted by the project, such as the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure and our Department of Innovation and Performance. We also will receive proposals or projects from city planning, who might be working with the community on a master plan. And Dave showed the South Side Park master plan. There have been others. So our staff integrates with city planning during that planning process. We give them some technical assistance and guidance where necessary to help the community come to decisions and conclusions about what can happen. Occasionally the work is directly advocated to us from the mayor or from city council, so we'll work with the stakeholders that they identify with us to help flush out a capital request. And then sometimes we even get we take public input via community process such as this capital budget forum, and we'll evaluate the feasibility of the proposal and we can recommend an approach. So there's a lot of different ways in which we get information and towards which we make a capital budget request. So what does that actual project proposal contain? Well, the first thing is kind of like Dave highlighted, we have our project description, which is just kind of a short narrative. Internally, we do a goal alignment. So in addition to those goals and objectives of the mayor, we have kind of what we note as a stage gating process in the department. So in short, we evaluate many things, but the main issues we're vetting are, are the projects addressing a known, life, health, safety concern? Are the projects addressing an identified existing department or city service deficiency? Is this a project that addresses a projected department and city service deficiency? So sometimes we might see the condition of an asset deteriorating, in which it's not yet unsafe to operate or to be in, but if it's continued to allow to deteriorate, it will quickly become that and would require us to take remedial measures. We try to avoid those situations as much as possible. And then also projects that could expand a city department or service capability. I think, as Catherine mentioned and Dave has mentioned, I think the Rec to Tech program is one of those exciting things. This is a place where we can interject and make some improvements, and I'll talk a little bit about that next. And in basic terms, if a project can't meet any above these criteria, we in Public Works, we cannot support it. We know the city has limited resources, but unless it can meet that kind of basic threshold, we have to prioritize other actions because we have so many assets that we are responsible for caring for. So new this year is an execution plan that Dave highlighted. So this is how Public Works proposes to develop the project from idea to completion. It's a high-level assessment, but what it does and what it helps us do, and I can talk about some of these learnings, is that it helps us identify the potential challenges, risks, and pitfalls, so we can avoid them. And in addition to that, there will be a cost estimate. So Public Works evaluates project proposals in a couple of different measures. Again, beyond our goal alignment, as I mentioned, we stage gate those things internally. So this is basically before a project manager like Andrea would fully flesh out a capital proposal. She'll give me the project narrative and the cost estimate. I will review. We will discuss whether or not the proposal has merit to go forward. Most of the time, it does. If it's ever questioned or we say we're uncertain, we will pass it on to the budget office. But if we feel pretty confident that it's not a viable project to put forth, we won't do that. We will also take into consideration, existing data points around the population. We rely on our department partners, such as Parks and Recreation, to kind of tell us what they need. So we take that information in, we go through it with them. We also look at the data points that we have internally on the asset's condition. We have now for several years now, we've been running a facility maintenance work order program, and we've been tracking the maintenance for about the last 5 years internally. So we've got we're starting to build a lot of really good data points about where some of our problems are, and we pull this information into our assessment to help us prioritize. From that, we also, based on the the size and the complexity of the project, we may also do some other considerations. What I call projected cost and projected value. So this factors into when the project gets so large and so much work is needed that we need to start evaluating it for energy efficiency and sustainability goals. So in addition to complying with ADA accessibility requirements, we also have city code provisions that trigger when the project gets so large that we really need to start looking at how we factor those things in. We are big proponents of them. Those improvements can get very expensive. We want to be thoughtful about how we make those interjections, and so we take a look at those, and when it reaches that level, we also will do a life cycle risk assessment. So we will look at the project, the timeline to replace, and we'll compare that against the remaining life cycle of the asset and the scenario to execute different paths. So sometimes that kind of informs some of our decisions about recommended path. The reason for that is there are just some city facilities that are what we consider critical infrastructure that the city cannot be without. And so when we get close to an end of a life cycle for that asset, we really have to think long and hard about how we're going to deliver that in the future with no disruption to citizens. And then again, as I mentioned, we'll also use the execution plan as a way to evaluate the proposal. So, we want to get as much done as possible in a reasonable amount of time as we can. That's what helps make the city safe. That's what helps bring improvements to a lot of different people. So if we can take a project apart and break it into more manageable phases, we'll do that. Sometimes what this means is we might take minor construction projects and we might package them over several years to make a major improvement. So, recent improvements that we've been making at Paulson Rec Center is a really great example of that. Those are improvements that we've kind of worked with Parks and Recreation to phase in over several years. We've brought ADA improvements to the building. We've brought fresh space, new space, created a better learning environment for the kids there. So those are really nice improvements that we're able to kind of deliver, over a series of time. I think the other thing that's important to note is that we kind of sit at a weird intersection of compliance and execution. We generally will not support projects, as I mentioned, that are in conflict with larger, broader city goals and objectives, or that have supporting information that is inconsistent or is insufficient to justify the need. We might recommend in some of those cases that we take a step and say, can we study this a little bit further before we can make a recommendation? Or the other last thing is that our professional staff, which myself is one, I'm a registered landscape architect, as is Andrea Ketzel. We have several registered architects as part of our team as well. But if the prevailing professional staff opinion is that the proposal cannot be accomplished reasonably, meaning that it does have insufficient land or building space, then we will not support that project. Why does it take so long? This is my other favorite question, because there's a lot to do. So the sheer volume of work that we have, it really requires organizational structure, and it really requires us to develop the ability to give clear direction to everybody involved so we can achieve these projects successfully. The other part of that is there's a difference between what we might consider minor and major projects that might be funded out of capital, and that's really one of scale and complexity, not necessarily money. So some types of minor construction projects which we consider are, playground replacements, roof replacements, masonry repairs, HVAC, and a variety of other things. There are types of major construction projects, such as Whiteman Park, which was recently completed, Southside Park, which we're in the midst of, Moore Pool, which will be opening this year, and improvements that will be coming very soon to the Oliver Bathhouse. Those are what we would classify as major construction projects. Now, I want to say minor and major is not necessarily scale to, the impact to the community for making those improvements. It's just about the complexity and the level of effort that Public Works must put into delivering that project. So I want to talk a little bit about some project examples. So Whiteman Park, which was recently completed in the fall of 2020. I think it's to note that, a master plan for Whiteman Park was actually completed in the winter of 2014. The construction for the park began in the fall of 2019. You can see some photos here of it in mid-construction and at completion. And so there's this period of time between the master plan and when construction begins and when often people happen. And this is where we call, the design phase, where we might also be getting grants. There was a lot of work in the background there to get that project to a place where we could construct it responsibly and reasonably with all of the partners that were involved. Another project example that Catherine mentioned too, and I'm glad to kind of touch on this, is Ammon Rec to Tech. So here you'll see a photo on the left. That was the previous condition. And it was just some simple tables, some chairs. There was an office in the back. You can kind of see highlighted in the back right. And so really we kind of took a deep dive with our Parks and Rec partners and really wanted to create an environment that was welcoming, for kids and was really conducive to making a great learning atmosphere. So we started really planning that in the spring of 2020. With some internal design services, we began our construction in spring of 2021, and we completed that in the fall of 2021. And I think it's like a really good example of a great partnership with another department to really be thoughtful about how we make this improvement. We took the large office and we converted it into the classroom space, so it was more conducive for quiet and learning. We brought the office outside and created some space for that in a way that gave those occupants who might be running the programs some visibility on the kids. And then we created a lounge area with kids with a few other amenities as well. And so I think it's just a really wonderful benefit. It's small, but no less impactful for all those people that are using it. Another project example is Moore Pool. And so Moore Pool, kind of had a little bit of a more interesting life. We began our construction in spring of 21. We actually identified this as a potential project internally in the department in 2018. What had happened is we had received in 2018 some reports from our water utility company that the pool was using an enormous amount of water, which was very odd to us. And then in 2019, pre-pandemic, we also noted a few instances of user injury that were odd and not typical of a normal swimming environment. And so we did an investigation and we discovered a condition that required us to investigate even further. And so in 2020, to the administration, I proposed that we begin investigating the incident. It required us to open up the pool, to remove the liner, to see the condition of pipes that were under the pool shell. And what we discovered was extremely challenging. And so we were able to work with council, with the budget office, to allocate funds under emergency provision, to begin to repair the pool in earnest. And those repairs were completely new plumbing. You see a lot of new concrete. We worked with our Parks and Rec folks to reduce and remove existing concrete and replant with grass, so it was a little bit cooler and a little bit more welcoming and inviting. We're really kind of excited to get this one open. This is one that I always say, I hear a lot about projects in the community, but this one I can pretty much guarantee you I heard about every single day, as my son uses this pool as his daycare. And so I would say this is kind of an accelerated timeline. So how that timeline works and all these steps. We will get an initial request. Like I said, we have many different channels. So as soon as that happens, we'll start gathering data. We will meet with our stakeholders. Start gathering input. Sometimes this has come out of a process that's already happened with the community. And so we're happy to become part of that. We will draft our proposal. Staff will internally review and get feedback from our technical team, and then we'll submit the request to the budget office. From there, as Dave mentioned, we kind of go through the budget review period. We can, at that time, we'll also may make further adjustments based on, recommendations, and then we'll finalize that request as part of that process. So when we talk about minor construction, we're talking about a timeline that's roughly about 18 months. We have that process that we just outlined. That usually takes about 3 to 6 months where we're developing a scope, we're going through our capital budget process, and we're getting council's approval for the capital budget. From there, we will design and procure those construction services with the intent on trying to construct, as in a reasonable time frame when we can. And that minor construction generally can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months, depending on a lot of factors. So we talk about major construction. This is typically, 3 or more years. We are looking at a longer scoping period. This usually takes us about a year, possibly much longer. Kind of depends on the issues and the complexity involved. We will get a council budget approval, but it will be for initial services. Those services could be design and engineering. They could even be pre-design and engineering, depending on the complexity. That process will typically last a year, to which case we will make an updated budget request with a more accurate funding to support construction. At this stage, we generally think that, a major construction project is typically, going to take us about a year, could be longer, depending on how many phases are involved or its complexity. But we will put that out to a public bid. So our typical design process, when we say it takes 12 to 18 months. So once we receive a capital budget approval to move forward, so we'll make a request for design services. Andrew will write a scope of work, or one of our other professional staff. We will review that work. We will put it out to through one of our procurement processes. From there, we will select a design team and we'll negotiate those contracts and get the necessary council and commission approvals. So from the start of that to the end of that process, which we will call our RFP process, that typically takes us about 2 to 4 months. Sometimes a little bit longer if it is something of great complexity. From there, once we start designing, we're going to go through a period of designing and stakeholder review. Those meetings typically will involve the community at key parts, during which time we would then, finalize our construction design, and we would be going out to preparing a bid package and getting our permits from city planning, through the Department of Permits and Licensing. That process will generally take 6 to 12 months to get through. So when we go to construct that, we again, we need to have the necessary funding before we go out to bid. And so part of the design process is to create a construction package. We will bid for construction design services if necessary. Additional design services sometimes is necessary. We will then, select the construction team, which is a low bid, lowest responsible bidder process. That contract gets negotiated. It goes through some commission and council approvals. And then we will execute the project, and the construction period will start. Once we start constructing, our construction management teams will review, inspections will be happening. We'll be working with those contractors to deconflict, work with change orders and unforeseen circumstances as necessary, and we'll finalize with a punch list, which is typically what we call substantial completion. And that's when the public can really begin to join it. The project may not in actuality be done. There are usually some following little tweaks that have to happen, but generally in that large process, it's going to take at least 6 months, and sometimes 12 months or more to get through that phase. We do have an option for accelerated construction. This is typically 2 years. It kind of follows the same process, but in this case, the design process and the construction process are very closely together. We are very limited by our ability to do this. We have rules in place, rules in law and city code that allow that only in certain specific circumstances. And so we, by necessity, have to be very thoughtful when we do that. And so that accelerated process, when that happens, we're partnering with a construction manager who may also be providing design services. We will negotiate that contract, and then we'll execute and begin. Again, we're still following that same, call and response with the stakeholder team, and the construction team is integrated with that as well. And then we will be designing as we prepare to build. And always design comes first, and always building goes last. But again, this is just a very accelerated process that we can follow only in very, very select circumstances. So again, why does it take so long? People always ask, what are these causes for delays? Sometimes those causes are, quite frankly, to be internal. So if we try to go too fast too soon, and this is usually a result of things like receiving an ambiguous request. When people aren't clear about what they want, if we can't get that clear direction from them, it makes us hard to sometimes take steps forward, and we have to work with them to figure out what that is. That also relates to kind of a poorly defined scope of work. Sometimes we have challenges with our real estate that are kind of unforeseen. Those could be things under the ground that we just didn't discover, but it could also be, issues of ownership that have to be worked out. And then if the other cause for delay is that we just, quite frankly, we didn't do enough work up front by figuring out our critical path for execution. So that's a place where we're really kind of focusing this year. Sometimes interagency coordination, whether we're working with PWSA jointly on an improvement, that may take additional time because we've got then two different design paths that need to line up. So sometimes interagency coordination, which we always welcome, can actually take a little bit longer, but I think in those instances it's warranted because we get a greater benefit to the public. The biggest challenge that we see so far is where we just have unanticipated site conditions, either during design or construction. Sometimes during the process, we might discover a feature that nobody knew was there. And that causes us to pause, figure out a safe, responsible way to approach the problem and come to a solution. With COVID, unfortunately, our market forces are playing a little bit of havoc and causing delays. I know everybody's probably well versed with that at this point, so I won't focus too much on it. And then, we do have our great staff, such as Andrea. The bandwidth also becomes an issue. We have to remember that a project manager for the city can be working on this project. It's going to be several years of their life, several years of their career. And so to be thoughtful on everything that needs to happen, it can sometimes be extremely challenging. And so we do work with our staff. I monitor bandwidth closely. I think that that's a critical component to success, is having amazing people delivering work for the city every day. So we in Public Works, we're committed to a foster of continuous improvement. So we want to learn from our mistakes and challenges. We want to share that learning with others. And so we're working with other city departments and agencies to improve that process for just better outcomes for everybody. So that's why I'm a huge advocate for the execution plan, because I think it allows us to be thoughtful with the community about what we're doing and what's reasonably achievable and what might take longer, and we can work together on that. So what we see from us this year in the capital budget, we have a lot of what I would call critical infrastructure projects. We have a lot of work that we're finishing design on in the near future, work that is going to help make the city safer, help making thriving and more welcoming. Some of those projects I can highlight are large scale construction projects, such as the Oliver Bathhouse, such as the fourth division, a new fourth division for Public Works, such as Homewood Park. That's just a sample. Those are large scale things where we know now that we're going to be needing additional funding, and so we're going to be putting forth those as well. We do have some infrastructure that we need critical repairs on. So that's just keeping infrastructure safe for use. And then we will also be focusing on a bevy of parks and recreation improvements across the city. And that is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Chris. I think there's been a lot of challenges with capital projects. Some of them are just straight up, commodities, market forces. Recently, we've seen obviously some increases there. Some of them are a little more underground, literally and figuratively. With Arsenal Park comes to mind for me in terms of trying to figure out what is under the ground there before you can even know what your construction budget is going to be, and having that been previously a site for battery, basically. You don't know if there's munitions underground. You've got to do some exploration. So each project, especially those really big ones, seems to have kind of its own wrinkles to it. So always interesting to dig into the details of DPW. We're going to do question and answer pretty much now, but I do want to go through a couple slides because they're related to some of the questions we've already gotten. But if you have a question, you have a couple options. You can type it out in the Q&A in Zoom, or you can also raise your hand and we can unmute you there. Just as a reminder tonight, so there's a really good question that was, sorry, I'm trying to get back to my, There's a really good question. Is this a meeting where public can actually talk and suggest projects priorities, or is it sort of pro forma, listening to presentations and taking a survey? So Rebecca was nice enough to answer that one, but this is an opportunity for you to talk back to us as well. So if you have a statement, you can make a statement if you'd like. If you have a question, you can pose that as well. What we're going to do with that information, both from the survey and from the questions you asked tonight, are share them with the people who would make decisions based on that information, right? So we're going to share it with the departments across the city and also all the council offices, because they're the two groups that submit the proposals for the capital budget. Also, your comments tonight will be part of the YouTube record that's going live now and will be reloaded once it's edited in a couple of days. Speaking of this survey, I just want to quickly do a short tour, just if nobody's been on the Engage PGH page. Thanks to City Planning for getting us on this platform. It's been a huge opportunity, both for us as a capital process, but also a lot of our great capital projects are hosted on engage.pittsburghpa.gov. So if you're looking for the budget stuff, it's the 2023 City of Pittsburgh budgets. Both the operating and the capital are on there. There's a lot of resources on the right-hand side if you want to check out the video for yesterday's meeting and then the meeting last week on mobility. We'll be uploading those very soon. There's some additional resources here in terms of if you just want to check out the budgets themselves or a summary document, those are there too. We have a timeline like a lot of capital projects do. We want to let you know kind of where we are in that, what the next steps are. And then also at the top here, there's two surveys. There's an operating and capital budget survey. So one of the questions we've already got was a comment related to tennis and pickleball and the condition of tennis courts. So there's a few options. If you have a specific court in mind, you want to let us know that the condition can be improved, you can go to this map and actually add your own marker. As you can see, we have quite a few capital budget ideas submitted already. Also, if you want to type it out, there's 3 opportunities in this first section to just describe the work that's needed. And please provide the location. That really helps us get the request into the right hands. So be as specific as you can there. But also, if you just want to say, I think the city in general should spend more money on sport courts, that's an opportunity too in this second section where you can tell us just kind of citywide for all of our assets. I want to see, better sport courts or just better conditions in our parks. You can submit a more general piece of feedback that way. And then at the very bottom, there's an opportunity to read some really nice detail, a write-up of each of the mayor's 2023 capital budget priorities. And then you can provide your own kind of rating on them on a scale of not important to very important. So the administration will get that feedback. They can react to it next year and adjust things as they go for the 2024 budget. So going into questions and answers, there was a question, is there an agenda for this event? There's not an agenda for this event, but we will again link the YouTube, the one that we're on right now, to that Engage PGH page in a few days once the innovation and performance team has a chance to edit everything together. There was a great comment. I would love to see more creatively accessible parks that do more than meet the ADA requirements. Also ones with built spaces that encourage multi-generational family use. So more than just for kids or just for adults. That's a really important comment. I think some of the things that City Parks highlighted as well is the need to provide amenities, not just for everybody, but with everybody, that all people in the same space can gather and enjoy one another's company. DPW, if there's any specific comments you want to offer in terms of the great strides you've made. I know both in terms of reconsidering entire playgrounds so that the path is not just accessible, but also inviting to people. Also some of the playground equipment we've upgraded over the years. Some of our swings, we've seen some great improvements there. But if there's anything specifically you want to highlight, feel free. I just want to make sure if there's any other questions. Looks like there's 2 people who have raised hands. So Kathy, Alex, would it be possible to unmute Kathy so Kathy can speak?
Okay, I'm Kathy Gallagher. I live on North 3rd Street in North Oakland. I've been active in the Oakland plan and advocating for the community center at the Heron Hill pumping station. From what I've heard this evening, I think we've ticked off every single box at the Heron Hill pumping station. But my question for the group is, does a project have to fit in a particular box, Or is there a provision for hybrid projects? For example, we have a very large senior citizen population in North Oakland. So you would think, oh yeah, healthy, active living center. However, we also have a very large university student population. And well, we don't need a playground here unless it's an art playground, but we are looking for a community asset that would bring those two populations together. So we don't want, we don't want to say, oh yeah, this is a senior citizen, so none of the students will. So is there a provision in the capital budget for a project that isn't necessarily it's not a rec center, it's not a healthy, active senior living?
Yeah, the good news is some of our facilities are actually combinations of both. So we have rec centers that are also healthy, active living centers. It does create some headaches for us on the accounting side when it comes to budgeting between them, but programmatically, it's really important to be able to offer both of those sets of services for those service populations in the same space. But I'll leave it open if anybody else from City Parks or maybe Catherine, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think one example that's happening recently, you're right, we do have facilities where both are present. But to this point of this really like intergenerational connection, meaning that the space use is for all. We have a project that is still in the design phase, which is the early phase, for the Brighton Heights Healthy Active Living Center. And a huge piece of that Brighton Heights Healthy Active Living Center has been two things: feedback from the community that like, hey, this could also be a center where we could have a presence and really benefit from this center being here. And also this concept of having space that would encourage and invite, not just participants of the Healthy Active Living Center or older adults that are using the space in that way, but also others to join together. And, we're looking at, it's the design in that is going to be, I think, a model for the way we can think about these things moving forward. And the project management team with DPW has done a great job in getting there. And it's still, early phases. When we get to the phase pretty soon here, actually, there should be even more ability to kind of showcase this to the community. This is one to watch for sure. I don't know if Chris, if that sounds right. That to me is the first example that came, and it's an exciting one. And I do think it's the way forward.
Yeah, I think it's the way forward too, Kathy, and I think it's a fantastic idea. Specific to the Heron Hill pump station and city-owned property around there. I can say that repurposement of infrastructure can be tough. That's going to require us to take a couple extra steps, right, before we can totally flush that out. And so, we're happy to work on that. I've gotten that request from a couple different directions now, so I'm happy to take it too. So we are looking at that for this capital budget cycle. It's gonna take us a while to get there if that's really truly what we want. But I think part of the process in this forum is to kind of raise those issues and talk about some of the challenges with them and how we can work together to meet those challenges.
And can I add one last thing? I'm sorry, because I just thought of this, Kathy. I'd love an opportunity to talk with you offline, maybe even about even though we don't have like the capital physical space yet, if there's something we can do to creatively bring programming that accomplishes some of this, we're open to that and would be interested in seeing what we can do there, because we recognize that in that part of Oakland, we don't necessarily have that facility there, but doesn't mean we can't have that programming somewhere that makes sense and can start to accomplish these things as the capital piece moves forward.
Well, that sounds great. We're ready. We're ready whenever you are.
Great. If you don't mind, I don't know how to connect with you. Maybe Dave, you could give me her email from the sign up or something after this. Okay.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, we get it from the
I
registration
look
list.
forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, We're gonna get to Carlos in just a second. Alex, if you want to unmute, but first I just wanted to chime in with another comment that's related from an anonymous attendee. Reads, this likely falls more into operations budget. We would love to see more programming opportunities between the healthy active living centers and the youth rec centers, kids and seniors together, which I definitely second that notion. And while Carlos is getting ready to speak, I do just want to highlight DPW does, I think, an excellent job of getting community input from the end users for something like Jefferson Rec Center renovations. I always think Whiteman was a big moment for me working in city government as a kind of first park project, seeing the direct line between people coming to public meetings and saying, we want a safe place to walk. And then DPW using that as a major design feature throughout Whiteman to have that walking trail that also integrates stormwater management. I think DPW has done a great job of being responsive to community needs. So Carlos, if you're ready, you think you're unmuted, so feel free to go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Carlos. I'm Chef Carlos. I'm the executive director of an organization called Feed the Hood. So I have a multitude of questions kind of all aimed at the same thing. So one of the questions I have is that in the community that I live in, Homewood, a lot of the recreation space that was in existence is owned by the URA. So how does the city manage to navigate that process as as I say that to say we are working on a project with the URA in one of those spaces and trying to figure out how to navigate. The other part is how does equity into what the city has lacked on for the past decade or so play into the capital budget? Seeing is that we have a lot of neighborhoods who have been neglected for several years and years and years, and understanding that these will take several millions of dollars, but because of the lack of equity and administrations, how does that play in a role? And the last kind of ties into the intergenerational conversation is I'm assuming that I can't see everybody that's on this call, but how does the city interact with the youth that'll actually be engaging in these places, and as far as even the design process and making sure that it's a place where they even want to be? I see some parks that are completely filled and some parks that are empty. So how does the city navigate that as far as making sure that they're there for the kids?
Yeah, those are critical concerns. So you brought up a lot of detail too. I think there's one project that can kind of hit two of those birds with one stone. So Andrea, I don't know if you want to talk about Homewood in a little bit. For me, it was really interesting to see the community kind of drive that conversation. I was part of an early conversation between Homewood Sports and former director Gable early on, where we were looking at the existing amenities, right? And the field that was not regulation size, that wasn't safe for kids, and looking at the nearby parcels and realizing, oh, the URA actually owns the neighboring school. So that became an opportunity where we could coordinate. The city was able to get that parcel, expand the park, get a regulation field, and actually add amenities into that site. But Adria, I don't know if you want to talk to some of the roles the kids have had in providing feedback on that project.
Yeah, I think in terms of the Homewood project, we are working with Homewood Community Sports. So the feedback that we're getting for that project is coming directly from that organization, which serves hundreds of youth in the Homewood neighborhood, as I'm sure you're familiar, Carlos. But in terms of even our ongoing engagement, we've been trying to schedule to meet people where they're at, where they're already recreating. So we've got some upcoming engagement in terms of the public art that's going to take place as part of that project. And our plan is to go to a football game or an existing event where we can again meet people where they're at and really get a broad spectrum of feedback in terms of that project. So I hope that helps answer your question a little bit there.
Yeah, it did a lot, and I was really more looking for projects. I know the Homewood project is a huge project, but I know that, for instance, there's the Homewood North Parklet that has sat dormant since 2006. There's a recreation field on Hermitage. And these are specific projects that the URA owns. So how does the community get those up off the ground, seeing as though we don't have any of those amenities in their neighborhood? Yes, football is very cool, but football is also all the way at the other side of the neighborhood. So when we talk about, where the community's at and meeting them where they're at, how do we get the other amenities that we don't have that other neighborhoods have, in place?
So I'll say, Director Pollock, if you want to speak to that, you're welcome to. I saw you come on video. We also do have kind of larger, we talked about this a little bit last night in the city planning meeting, but we do have some larger planning efforts that do help point those out to us. So the open space plan is a good example that shows us kind of heat maps where there are assets that may have overlapping or underserved neighborhoods in terms of walkshed for something like a baseball field. There's guidance that they also put in that policy-wise that children should live within a 10-minute walk of a park. So that kind of stuff, whenever we get proposals that meet those requirements, they end up scoring really high in the capital budget process. But Director Pollock, I don't know if you want to speak on that one too.
Sure, thanks, Dave. I think that you hit many of the points that I wanted to make. I think the thing that I most wanted to point out was that whether a parcel is city-owned or URA-owned, it's still under public ownership, right? And so in those circumstances, we have a fair degree of latitude in when there is public demand and community demand to figure out the best way to serve the needs that are elevated to us from the public. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the city can get the land from the URA for free. I mean, we have to figure out the ways in which to make that work financially through the budgeting process. And that may, in some circumstances, be complicated. But, if I would encourage folks to think about any publicly owned land, whether it's owned by the URA, the city, or some other public entity, as being part of the sort of thing that we are able to sort out if we have a clear sense from the community around the desired use. And so I wouldn't necessarily draw a firm line there. That's not necessarily to say that that hasn't been more or less complicated at different points in the past, but I think I can say pretty definitively that we're willing to work with the public and with the other entities that might own a piece of the other public entities that might own a piece of land in the city to find a solution that meets the needs of the community. It's a very different case when it's privately owned land, as is sometimes the case when folks identify a site that might be a great place for a recreational facility, but a private entity owns it, and we can't either directly or indirectly influence that outcome. But I would just encourage folks to consider all publicly owned land as being places where we can entertain these conversations if there's a community consensus around it.
Yeah, unfortunately, once we signal our interest in a privately owned piece of land, we can get price gouged pretty easily. People know that it's really crucial to some of our programming. They'll raise the price on us. But I think that's an excellent point about publicly owned land. So Chris made a comment advocating specifically for Shenley Park, better tennis courts there and a practice facility. The cosmetic resurfacing 3 years ago failed. We also need new lighting at the Shenley courts. So lighting is something we've definitely been expanding both with baseball and tennis courts. There's also some really great specific comments about pickleball that we'll be sure to consider with our capital budget proposals in regards to how to site them, highlighting the good models at Frick and Moore and Bud Hammer. Lastly, I think there's something worth highlighting. So Chris talks about a nice budget item for fixing the courts at Mellon Bubble, Washington's Landing, and Highland Park, but please try to organize these projects so that not too many courts are offline at the same time. For instance, fix Washington's Landing first and then Highland. This is a pain point I think we all feel in different ways for all kinds of capital projects. I used to hate construction on the road. Now I look at it and I think progress. That's somebody getting a new sewer lateral. That's somebody getting a new paved road. Or maybe they're burying electric lines or something else that will improve the community. It doesn't feel great when you miss your entire season for football or when you have to sit in traffic, but it's hopefully a nice concession for a long-term gain that you're going to have better infrastructure at the end of that. So I just want to say thank you for your comments, Chris, and thanks for answering the survey as well. Elizabeth brought up a good point that seconding what Kathy said, that they work in Oakland, it's fairly decent senior population scattered between our 4 neighborhoods. Having something in North Oakland is great, but we could use other facilities in other parts of Oakland. South Oakland's Field House is a sad little building in a great location with great potential. And also just talked about kind of the lack of facilities. So one of the tricky things, especially from like a district perspective, is not all districts, not all neighborhoods have the same populations, have the same needs. So there are some districts that have, 3 times the mileage in terms of paving needs that other districts have. Some districts have multiple pools, some districts have 1 or 0. So it's just tough. There's not a set rule in terms of the geography that way. What we try to do is look programmatically through those larger planning processes to make sure that everybody's within a decent watershed of key infrastructure. There's also some infrastructure that, because of the size of population that would utilize it, makes sense to just be kind of citywide. So things like skate parks or the cycling track down on Washington's Boulevard, those are kind of things that we want to invest in and make one really great citywide asset that people can travel to utilize, just because of the specialty nature of it or the great expense it may take to build it. There's another good question. Can we have a Bloomfield Senior Center? I've seen that one come up before. Chris or Andrew, I guess more Chris. I don't know if you want to speak to any of the efforts in that neighborhood with the senior center, or at least for the rec center that's over there.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. I mean, it's certainly something that the councilwoman has reached out to me about to discuss, and certainly something that we're going to recommend, starting an approach there as well. Another case of, a facility that has, fell into closure and misuse. And when that happens, unfortunately, its condition deteriorates really quickly. I mean, we recognize that, the community would really be interested in, having a multi-generational facility in Bloomfield as well. And so, we're going to, begin that process and start recommending, path forwards there. Working in conjunction with her office and the mayor's office. And that's kind of where that one stands.
Yeah. There's some great bocce courts over that way too. Joanna, did you want to come off mic and ask your question or make your comment?
Sure. Good evening. Thank you so much for your time. I just wanted to thank the city for working on a plan for Fowler Park in Perry Hilltop with the community in the surrounding area for the last year, and for considering funding the implementation of that plan. And I just wanted to encourage the city to fully fund the plan, including the indoor sports court building that's incomplete, and take a greater role in the managing of that park that the Pittsburgh project has been handling for 16 years, and also getting the pool open as soon as possible. So thank you so much. That's the big thing. We're headed in the right direction, and we look forward to working with you to see that happen.
Great. Thank you very much for your comment. So I don't see anything else that's still open, but if you have any further questions, you can put them in the Q&A or raise your hand. I'll try to do one more sweep. We're hitting the home stretch here. So I just want to end on a high note with some of the ways that hopefully this process is really impactful, both for you and for us. So first of all, we want to talk through what happens once you submit a survey. When you provide us with project ideas, these first 2 columns on the left in white, in this case, we got some really great specific comments last year about converting Manchester Pool into a spray park. Our staff goes through and does all the work in yellow. So we will review the project idea, we'll tag it for the project type, also the relevant department who handles those types of projects. And if there's any specific geography given to the idea, we'll make sure to note the council district in that as well. What we end up doing is compiling everything into one spreadsheet, but every individual idea is tagged with those pieces of data so that when we send out that kind of master spreadsheet, while the survey data, all of the public comments from the meetings, council offices can go through and just sort the sorry, it's been a long week. They can sort the spreadsheet by service area just to see things relevant to their district. People like Chris and Andrea, Catherine and Luann can go through and search by department as well and just filter to look for things that are DPW or city parks related. That helps them kind of inspire for new ideas for next year's budget and hopefully inspires some new budget proposals. For example, as you can see here, that turned into something that became a funded project in the 2022 capital budget. We also like to just check in every year and kind of see, in terms of the survey responses that we're getting on the right-hand side, how do those match up with the actual projects that we're funding in the capital budget? So on the right-hand side is our survey responses broken out by type. The orange type is going to be engineering and construction. So that's a lot of our bridge projects, public stairs, roadways, sidewalks, things like that. This big blue section, which was 48% of our survey responses last year, is our facility projects. So that includes both buildings like rec and senior centers, but also our parks as well. In terms of what was actually funded for projects dollar-wise in the 2022 capital budget, we did pretty well. We matched public input pretty closely. You can see the orange section is about 53% of the budget ended up being projects that the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure does. And we had a pretty decent chunk for DPW to work on as well for those facility projects. Closing out, we want to make sure that you have as many tools available to you as possible. I always like to say the first line of defense for capital projects is 311. If you see something that doesn't look right, feel free to tweet at them. There's also the phone number, of course, the classic version, an online presence there too. You can go to our website for the Office of Management and Budget, pittsburghpa.gov/OMB, to learn more about this process and look at the budgets in great detail. You can also email the capital team, which is cip@pittsburghpa.gov, with any questions you may have. There's a few of us attached to that inbox, and we try to get answers back to you as soon as possible. You can also reach out to your council office. That's what they're there for. They're there to advocate for you and your community. So if you have any ideas for 2023 capital budget, feel free to submit a survey, but also don't feel afraid to talk to your council or your elected office. Council budget office is going to be part of the process too for scoring, so they can be a great resource. Again, the survey, please feel free to fill that out. And then in the fall, we're going to be coming back to you with another tool called Balancing Act that's going to allow you to provide direct comment on the mayor's draft budget before the submission of the final budget in November. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and just do one more check to make sure we got all the questions. I don't see any raised hands. So with that, I would like to say thank you so much to the departments tonight. City Parks and DPW do amazing work every single day with not enough resources and a lot of complications in their job. I want to say thank you to Neighborhood Services, to the Department of Innovation and Performance, and to our 2 ASL interpreters tonight. We couldn't do this meeting without them. So thanks again for that. And especially thank you to everybody that came out tonight. I know it's a beautiful summer night. There's a lot to do. You took time out of your day to come learn about the capital budget and give us feedback. And we understand what that means. So thank you again for attending. Again, if you have any questions, you can email us at cip@pittsburghpa.gov. Thanks. Have a good night.